Well, hello and welcome to the Danielle Strickland podcast. This season has been called Right Side Up, and it was in partnership with World Vision. And what we did was we took a deep dive, and what we've done, if you're tracking with this, is we've taken a deep dive into the Beatitudes. And we thought to ourselves, I really thought to myself, most of the people that I've learned the most about the ways of Jesus from are people that I don't normally hear from. They're not the ones in North America that have sort of the platforms or the capacity to have their voices heard above the noise. They're actually the ones that are grinding it out. They're the ones on the front lines, the ones on the grassroots, the ones who are in their own circumstances of, well, life, the muck and the mire and the difficulties of life, that have these encounters with God, and learning from them and listening to them and actually being challenged by their own hope and resilience, but also experience and suffering. Like, that's been where my biggest challenges and my biggest aha moments and my biggest sort of experiences and encounters of God myself. And so I had this kind of idea, like, what if we could upside down it? The Beatitudes are Jesus's manifesto, just these like, blessed are, where he inverts blessing rather than be some sort of successful and happy and upwardly mobile person. Actually, the blessing is in the encountering of God and the encountering of participating in the life of Jesus. And so I thought, what if we could get those voices that we don't normally hear, that aren't normally the ones that are like loudest, the ones that have experienced some of these blessings and know what it means, and maybe they could tell us. And what if we got people who had platforms and who had voices and who had whose voices were sort of raised, but instead of them answering the questions, what if they asked the questions, and we partnered them with people that they could learn from and grow in and all kinds of things. And then we thought, what if not just listening to this was enough? What if we could even participate? We could actually get to and touch and feel a little bit of what Jesus was inviting us into in our everyday lives. So we added sort of the Matthew 25 challenge onto this Beatitude discussion as an invitational way of getting to, just practicing, leaning in to this life, this blessed life. And there's a couple of observations I have about this whole experiment and this whole season. First of all, I just want to say a great big huge thanks to World Vision. They've been amazing partners. And I don't know about you, there's a few more to come, but you've heard from some of the best of people who have experienced God and been invited into participation in the ways of God. And it's just below your mind amazing, right? That these people have not only survived their own circumstances, but have thrived in partnership with God, and who are honest and humble and willing and open to share that experience with us. So boom, number one, I've just been so grateful, and special thanks to World Vision that they've done that. But also the global team, right, has gone out of their way to get to those places, to record those conversations. If you haven't had a chance yet, they've all been recorded on a phone, so you can actually see the person that is talking, and that can be so powerful. So if you get a chance to check it out on YouTube or on the World Vision site, please do. Brené Brown said that the fastest way from your head to your heart is through your hands. So Brené Brown said the fastest way from your head to your heart is through your hands. I heard that many years ago, but recently I heard it again, and I was going over in my mind just that phrase over and over again, because I believe that's true. In my own experience, this is true. And I was thinking about how participating in, which is what Jesus is inviting, that is a blessed life. It's not just theoretical ideas. It's not just the form. It's not just even great lofty thoughts or supernatural encounters with God. It's participating in the life of Jesus. And Jesus was, it had experienced poverty of spirit. Even just to get to the human form, he emptied himself, the scripture says, right? So there's no one poorer in spirit. There's no one who is grieved, a man of sorrows, right? Grieved over the condition of the world, grieved over the distorted nature of sin and what it's done to humanity and to creation, grieved over all that he saw, grieved over even the lack of reception and the lack of willingness to even see who he was, grieved over the ramifications of sin, which meant his suffering and his death. Anyway, the man of sorrows, right? grief and mourning, that he wasn't someone that just shied away or compartmentalized himself, but he entered into the grief. He sweat drops of blood. He cried over Jerusalem. I mean, he cried at his friend's funeral. He was moved with compassion. So you see Jesus entering in, hungering and thirsting for righteousness. You know, the time in Jesus' life where his disciples are like, are you not hungry? And he's I have bread that you know not of. You know, the sustaining presence of God in the midst of his own hunger and thirst for things to be made right. You know, nobody's done that more than Jesus. And every time we do that, every time we tap into what it means to hunger and thirst for righteousness, we're tapping in, we're being invited in to participate in the life of Christ. Of course, this is so upside down, you know, persecution, right? Mercy. All of these things. There's no one more merciful than Jesus. There's no one that has been more persecuted unto death than Christ. And on this goes. And this is, the Beatitudes then become this doorway into another way of living. But it's not enough just to talk about this stuff. It's participation. So my family did the Matthew 25 challenge so that we could get ready to invite a whole bunch of other people to do it with us. So we did this, and my reflections on this are fascinating. You know, in my own life, I've been fascinated by this experience. And I wanted to share those ideas with you as you consider participating with us in just this 1 week that you take to just get intentional about the way you enter in, to empathize, to really allow the frustration and the inconvenience and the disruption to move you towards God and what it was like to live like Jesus in the world. So, first of all, I just want to talk about how participation is the active learning, is the highest form of learning. And I want to talk about that because I think it matters, because it's so hard to get people to enter in through this distance thing, you know, through Zoom. I was just talking about this with a friend of mine. I mean, I want to do interactive things. I mean, I want people to experience, to touch, and to feel. I mean, all of the things that Brave Global Conference, the event of girls, is all like, you could touch it. There's martial arts, and there's projects, and there's crafts, and there's things you can throw, and there's food you can taste. You know, it's all just this interactive. There's people that you can touch beside you, and you know, you're dancing, and it's all so interactive. And Amplified Peace, which is these immersion trips that I take people on to have a look at how peacemaking is done and how peacemaking is possible in some of the most, you know, difficult places on earth, and then sort of talk through like what that's like for us now that we know that this is possible. Then how will we live? And so it's all touch, it's all experience, it's all immerse yourself in the narrative, like go to the place. We're sitting in Robben Island in Cape Town, or we're sitting in the Gaza Strip in a widow's refugee camp, you know, with some widows, or we're sitting, you know, in the Congo, and we're touching, we're feeling, we're needing, and it's all this kind of participation thing. And I realize, like, even in Infinitum, which is a discipleship program that I run, even that is all like postures, use your body, like enter in, like connect with other people. It's all this participation. And the reason that is the case is because participation is the highest form of learning. I mean, this is Jesus's invitation to discipleship. It was never a theoretical exercise. It was never just an existential, you know, just a knowledge-based program. It was always, come, follow me. Come and I'll show you. Come and experience, come and touch, come and feel, come and eat, come and participate in this life. So what we were doing with this podcast, and we know that if you're listening to this, of course you're listening to this and you're driving, or you're eating, or you're doing something in the kitchen, or you're running, or whatever it is that you're doing, and we're excited that you're just tuning in. Trust me, I'm excited that you're just watching this. But please know that the greatest way, if you want to just move a little bit forward into experiencing and touching and tasting a little bit of what we're telling, not the whole thing, but a little bit, maybe sign up for the Matthew 25 challenge with your family or with your friends or whoever you want to do it, even by yourself if you want to, just to kind of move in the direction of participation. Go from your head to your heart through your hands. Okay, that's just that simple. My friend Alicia was just over the other day, and she was talking about how she goes to school sometimes, and she runs this nonprofit called the Restoration Project, which is helping adults with disabilities learn how to make things. And how she does presentations to schools and stuff about what it is she does is they usually make something together. And so, you know, let's say they're just making something really simple, like a small table, but first they'll select the wood, and the wood will look kind of maybe, I don't know, not that great, but she'll talk about how she can see the value in the wood. Even before they begin to restore it, there's value in the actual wood itself. And then obviously talking about how everybody has this value. Everybody is worth restoration. Everybody's worth redeeming because there's qualities, there's value that are inside of this wood. And then kind of as they're fixing the wood, they're talking about like how the wood needs to be placed in together in the right way, you know, and just how formation happens and foundation and placement. And then as they're finishing, they're talking about the finishing work and how things need to be sanded over, the hard parts, and painted, and the process by which that happens. And she says by far, out of all the ways that she communicates, the most powerful thing that she ever says is, or the thing that the kids remember the most, and the thing that the kids talk about the most, at least the parents say, are these tables and how they can touch and feel and know and see and participate in something that they built with their own hands that tells a message of what is true in real life. And so that's this participation. The fastest way from your head to your heart is through your hands. Participate, participate, participate. So here we go. So we did the Matthew 25 challenge as a family, and a couple of observations for me. The first was that my son Judah, who's 11 years old, he's always for it. He's always into it. He's always like the first one into encounter and things like that. He's a deep thinker, very thoughtful about life. And he actually had the most resistance to the challenge. And he kept asking, and hopefully if you join the challenge, you'll see some of this in the video footage. But he kept asking this question about, you know, what does this matter? Like, why are we doing this? At one point, he just was so frustrated. He was like, I don't understand how us, you know, entering the life and the experience of somebody else helps that person at all. And it was so interesting to see and to feel his resistance. And then just to reflect on it a little bit. Now, I can't tell you that I was always reflective. Sometimes I was just angry and I was just like, jeepers, just like do what I ask you to do, or like we're doing this together, just get with it, like don't be so negative. And I think obviously, you know, some of it was that there was, you know, I was recording some of his reactions. And so that's always awkward, right? To be observed while you're trying to process some things. But I think ultimately what he was getting at is what everybody feels when it comes to global poverty, when it comes to injustices around the world, when it comes to the reality of how we live versus the way that, you know, 2/3 of the world live. There is all of this angst and guilt and kind of futility that is bottled up inside of us. And so what we do is we protect ourselves from getting involved in the conversation too much, because to get involved in the conversation means that some things have to be touched and felt on the inside of us. And that is way harder than just solving the problem, you know. And it actually flipped me back to a time where I was living in a drug addicted community and I was friends with like a prayer warrior person. And we call her an intercessor, and we were walking down, we were going on a prayer walk or something like that. And I was perusing the neighborhood to see what we could do to solve the injustice, you know, to answer the cry, to like get to the work. Like, what could we start to do? What could we dismantle? What could we build? All of the things. I'm prayer walking, just with this perception. But my friend, you know, literally I realized a couple minutes into the prayer walk was not prayer walking with me anymore. She was gone. I looked around, she was nowhere to be found. I retraced our steps backwards and found her kneeling at the foot of this woman. So this is a common scene in this neighborhood. Somebody who is so out of it, so, you know, drugged out, that they would be lying kind of on the ground of an alley, kind of half out of it, half dressed, you know, just indifferent, and just like lost on so many levels of lost. And you just learned that was a part of the landscape in so many ways. And and I was praying like, God, you know, please help us, you know, to solve this problem and this problem, you know, these things. But here was my friend kneeling at the foot of this woman, and she had put her coat to cover the woman's body, and she was just weeping. Now, here's what was going on the inside of me. I was like, this is an absolute waste of time. Like, what are you going to stop for every single one? Like, we're never going to be able to finish a prayer walk. We're never going to be able to set something up. Like, we're never going to be able to deal with the problems because this is too much. Like, I wanted to get to the functional answer, and she needed, and actually was being called by God to get to the grief, to get to the grief, to get to the mourning, to get to the hunger and the thirst. Is this ringing any bells for anybody here, right? Like, Jesus was inviting us in to participate in his life. There was now, I still didn't quite get it, but God highlighted for me in Ezekiel, there's these crazy 3 chapters. I mean, almost all of Ezekiel is crazy, but there are these crazy 3 chapters, 7, 8, and 9. Maybe it's 6, 7, 8. Anyway, there's 3 chapters in Ezekiel, and it's like a vision that Ezekiel has where God takes him by the hair of his head. This is the image. I was like, if God takes you by the hair of your head, you should pay attention. God takes him by the hair of the head, and he shows him, this is what Ezekiel says, the sins of Israel. He shows him inside the church. He shows him outside the church. He shows him the sins of Israel. And then he says, I am going to send angels with pens that will make a mark on the forehead of everyone who will grieve for the sins of Israel, everyone who will weep for the sins of Israel. Then I'm going to send an angel through with a sword who will kill everyone who does not weep for the sins of Israel. Now, it's a crazy story. Like, it's like what this vision that Ezekiel has. But as I was reading that Ezekiel vision, I flipped back to the story with my friend, and I felt like God said to me, what I need are not just people who will solve the problem, but who will love the people, who will grieve with the people, who will mourn for the loss, who will hunger and thirst, who will participate in the life of Christ. This is what I think, what Matthew 25 is actually talking about, where it's like, what you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. I don't think it's just like transactional, like we should look after the poor because we might be looking after Jesus somehow. I think there's something incarnational in it. I think that as we mourn and grieve and enter in and hunger and thirst, as we participate, we are actually participating in the life of Christ. There's something invitational in it, but we are so resistant to it because we just want to solve a problem instead of love a people. What? And this is what I felt, the resistance in Judah. Why the resistance? I mean, the resistance because he's old enough to know that this is hard and complicated, and he's old enough to know the ramifications even ahead of time. If I enter into this, this is going to make me feel bad. If I enter into this, this is going to be hard. If I enter into this, I'm going to have to rethink the way that I live my life. If I enter, like, he's just like, where do we send a check? And I feel like most of us are like, just where do we send a check? And like, make no mistake, there are always checks to be signed and checks to be sent. And there's always money that we could use. And there's always some sort of redistribution that God's asking us. There's always resources needing to be poured out. I mean, don't make a mistake here, but God did not say to Ezekiel, I'm going to show you where all the brokenness is. And then I just want to put a mark on the people who will do something about it, which is what I want to be the truth. What he said is, I'm going to put a mark on the people who will weep for it, who will feel something about it, who will empathize, who will enter in, who will participate, And then, of course, we're just flooded with like, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, who get to the place where I can't do anything about this, who will kneel at the foot of the woman who's like strong, who will kneel at the feet of kids who don't have clean water, who will stand and weep for those who hunger and thirst for the righteousness of God to come in places where they cannot be kept safe, or their voices aren't heard, or they're snuffed out, their very lives are taken. I mean, who will stop in that place and empathize and feel and weep and mourn for the brokenness of the world. I am looking for people who will do that. And that's such a different ask, isn't it? I'm looking, and I'm going to mark the people who will, because something is transformative about the invitation. There's something that God's inviting us to go ahead and allow ourselves. Well, and this is what's really interesting about partnering with World Vision on this whole thing, is that, of course, their founder is famous for this quote, "May my heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God." That's his famous quote. May my heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God, which is really leaning in. Which is, if you went on a prayer walk with that guy, he would be kneeling at the foot of the first orphan that he met. And he was not going to move on until he actually gets to the invitation that Jesus is inviting for this one person. We have to be moved by the human condition. We have to enter into it. The invitation for and from Jesus is to participate in this work. And so my observations about the Matthew 25 challenge aren't probably as inviting as you might think. It's hard. It's hard and it's difficult because it's asking us to go a little bit deeper. Now, one of the things that happened is my son's birthday was coming up right after the challenge, and I was asking him what he wanted for his birthday. And my son really was just going through a list of things that he already had. He's just like, Mom, I have so much. He said, what I would really like for my birthday is for you to buy a goat for somebody in Africa. And we had this conversation. He'd been given that for Christmas before, like a little stuffed goat, and it was connected to a goat. And he's like, but what was happening to him is through the challenge, even though he was resisting it because he is a feeler, even though he was resisting it because he is a deep thinker, even though he was resisting it because what he was resisting was the angst, was the pain, was the juxtaposition, was the tension in his own life. Even though he was resisting that, he was already coming to some really powerful conclusions. Now, we're going to give him a birthday gift anyway. I mean, we're going to celebrate his birth, and we're going to, just have the joy and be open-handed with what it is that God has given us. But we also, just that work is being done on him, that way of viewing the world, that we're actually neighbors with our brothers and sisters from the whole world, that actually the world's not okay as it is. And it needs some people to lean into the tension, that God is still calling people and placing marks on the foreheads of people who will weep and grieve over the sins of the world, that things are not, and God is still inviting us ever more than ever before into this manifest invitation, into this beatitudes, into this upside down, right side up living, to say, if you could only see in all of these places that you avoid like crazy, in the grief, in the mourning, in the weakness, in the meekness, in the hunger, in the thirst, in the persecution, in the mercy, if you avoid these things like crazy. But if you could only see that these things are the very doorway into the fullness that I have, the life that I have for you, the discovery that you are not what you own, the discovery that the meaning is not found in the solution, but in the process, that if only you could discover that God doesn't need you to solve the problem, he needs you to love the people. It would change everything. It would change everything. And this is, this is that. Many, many years ago, I was with my son at an IMAX, my eldest son. We went to we see this IMAX film, and it was about these sardines. It's like this thing that happens every year. All of these hundreds of thousands, millions of sardines all gather off the coast of South Africa in this one region. And it showed how all of the animals know, the whales migrate there, the sharks come in there, all these other fish, because it's a feeding frenzy. The villagers come out, they're catching the sardines, and you kind of can't stop but kind of feel a little bit bad for the sardines. My son and I are like, dang, those sardines have a hard life, because basically they're just there for that one time, and then all of these people are coming to feed. And just when you think all of this feeding is happening, it's all being done, these birds show up, and these birds are these crazy birds that just dive as far as they can all the way into the water. And it's in this IMAX theater in these 3D glasses, and you just see these birds and you think, okay, they're going to pick them off the surface. But no, they go all the way down into the surface, under the surface, into the depth, up to 10 feet. They can dive into the water, these birds, and they capture the sardines. And my son and I were just thinking, man, there is no, these sardines are not going to make it, the birds are coming out of the sky now. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the descension of Christ, and I was thinking about how, we think that when Jesus left heaven, he descends as a human, which is true. It's a kenosis, it's an emptying. That the theological implications of the incarnation is that God emptied himself. He entered into human form. And then I thought that was the end. But then, of course, Jesus's life is where he descends even further still. So the baptism of Christ, he descends not just into human form, but also into the human condition. Do you remember he was baptized in a baptism of repentance, which was to suggest that maybe he'd done something wrong. And then, see, remember, John the Baptist is like, that's not right. Jesus, I can't baptize you. You've done nothing wrong. And he goes, no, do it. It's to fulfill all righteousness. for right relationship. Hello, people. So it's like, I'm going to go deeper still under the waters. Now he's gone from the human form to the human condition, but then he goes even further still. You just think, like, literally Jesus's life could be characterized by, like, how low can he go, you know? He goes even further to the crucifixion. And then the scriptures tells us even further than that to the grave, even further than that to the depths of hell. So Jesus is descending, like those birds, you know, just like all the way down. And the Beatitudes are an invitation to descend. And this is what's so resistant. This is why we're so, like, we're confused, and we're like my son Judah, like, please, like, don't make me do that. Like, we're just like, like allergic, like we're avoiding all of these very areas that are actually ways into the life of Christ. And as we look at people in history, and as we've heard from the experts that we've gathered from around the world, you know, I mean, these people who have experienced the depth of Christ's love, the calling, the redemption, the transformation, the way that God is still using them in, like, confounding ways in their own current circumstances. I mean, rethinking their theology and inviting them to live these incredible lives. Like, I just the flood of these people coming to mind as I'm listening to their experience and hope, and being so challenged and invited. I mean, this is what God is inviting us to. So I know that's a lot to get out of a challenge. And I know that the challenge, you know, on the surface level, the challenge was a discomfort that awakened us to the plight of people all around the world. It was an invitation for us to go a little further. It was loosening us up in our own recognition of all that we had, so that we would be willing to share more. Ideally, a Matthew 25 challenge culminates with the sponsorship of a child, a connection to somebody around the other side of the globe, and in a generosity. Yes, absolutely. But even deeper than that, the challenge was a way in. It was an invitation, a reminder. It was a heart check. It was a depth gauge. It was that echoing voice of the Holy Spirit telling me that what it is that God's looking for on the earth are not just problem solvers, but people lovers. And that ultimately the Beatitudes, this right side up living, is about loving people, knowing people, listening to people, entering in to the grief and the sorrow and the mourning and the meekness and the mercy and the hunger and the thirst and the persecution, so that we might live deep, beautiful lives for God's kingdom come. So this whole season's been this invitation, a reawakening, a reimagining, a remembering, even an awakening to what it is that God's already invited me into, and what it is that God's inviting you into. I hope you've been challenged. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been invited. I hope you sense the invitation for you to join us, to keep participating. Please remind yourself that the fastest way from your head to your heart is through your hands, and participate in this challenge with us. Would you, as a family? You'll catch some of those videos and see some of those reflections and encouragement on a daily basis for that 1 week. Let's do this, friends, and let's continue to live right side up in an upside down world. Could we? Could we continue to live lives of dissension instead of ascension, that we would constantly be looking for the way of Christ down into the ways of Jesus, that we would be leaving the Mount of Transfiguration, the revelation of who Jesus is, and following him right smack dab to the suffering of the world, one person at a time, and stopping there and being moved there and living there until we experience all that it is that God has for us, right relationship with him, right relationship with ourselves, doing some of that resolution work in our own lives about how to live with the life that we've been given, and then also right relationship with our brothers and sisters around the world. This is, it's a lot, and it's good, and it's been an honor to be doing this season. We have a couple more to go, and then we have the Matthew 25 challenge. So if you're listening to this and you want to go a little bit further, I'm inviting you to join us for the Matthew 25 challenge. This is the week of November 14 to 20. Okay, so if you're in America, you can text BLESSED to 44888. If you're in Canada, text BLESSED to 98669. If you're anywhere else in the world, worldvision.org/right-side-up. worldvision.org/right-side-up. And if you're listening to this after November, please don't feel left out. There's lots of ways you can still participate at worldvision.org/right-side-up. Again, a special thanks to World Vision for being such awesome partners on this journey, and all of the people who lent their experience and hope, their voices, and all of my leader friends who lent their platforms and their curiosity and their example. Wow, I'm overwhelmed with the way that God has been inviting me to go deeper and think differently and more thoroughly, and keep inviting me to love people better every single day. So I hope that this is helping you to live right side up in an upside down world. And grace and peace to you as you live a blessed life right now.